First visit by a pope in 20 years. What have been the moments that you believe have been most poignant for the people and for Pope Francis?
Well, I think yesterday was just amazing. He went to the typhoon-ravaged area, Tacloban, and he had his homily prepared about compassion for the people and so on. He put it aside and said, look, I just wanted to be with you. You know, my whole trip was to come here and be with you. I don't know what to say. I want to just suffer with you. And you know, that such a small area, they'd never had any famous person visit them. And now the Pope and the whole world was watching them. And that was really moving. In the rain, he had been told not to go to Tacloban because of the bad weather and another typhoon coming, and he said, no, this whole trip has been to go there, so I must go. And even though he had to cut his visit short by 3 or 4 hours, he still went there, and that was really moving. And then the reception, you know, before the trip started to the Philippines, they had a survey saying, are you excited by this, very excited by the trip, excited, indifferent, or against the trip? And more than 80% were very excited. You know, that was just an amazing reception he got. Apparently, they had decorated the streets coming up into Manila from the airport on the first day with lots of pictures of him, and word came that he wasn't very keen on seeing himself, and so they took them down. No, here's a man who's very humble and lives a simple life, and people just love him. You know, they really love him. They had John Paul II come to visit them 20 years ago in 1995, also in January. This was a huge crowd, and so they've waited all these years to see this Pope they really love.
Yes, you know, Pope Francis certainly has endeared himself to so many Catholics around the world. Now he comes to the Philippines. We hear him talking about fighting poverty and corruption. We hear him talking about support of the family, which he just said, we must protect the family from insidious attacks.
That's right.
So he has kept with these themes there in the Philippines. Why have these particular themes been important to him on this trip?
Well, I think that's really interesting. The family is the topic of the church in 2014, 2015. There was a synod, a meeting of bishops in Rome last October. There will be one this coming October. In the year in between, all the bishops of the world have been asked to talk about and discuss the challenges to the family all around the world, which are obviously many and different in different parts of the world. And here in the Philippines, for example, is poverty and corruption, which he's been talking a lot about. But also protection from the family, protection from the redefinition of marriage and the attacks, the ideological attacks on the family. This is a topic that the Pope has very much in his heart and wants everybody to think about. And, you know, even when he arrived, the first homily, he talked mostly about the family and the protection of the family. And in the Philippines, where the family is very strong, and the society is very strong in that sense of looking after each other, he wanted to talk about this and also say thank you, because the family here is good and is strong, and it could be seen from the rest of the world. But obviously the family is something very close to the Pope's heart, and he wants the Catholic Church to contribute to the well-being of the world by strengthening the family and saying how important the family is, and actually helping real families to have a happy and fulfilled life.
And I want to ask you, Jack, there was a new law enacted just a few months ago in the Philippines that allows for free contraception for women. Is that a defeat for the Catholic Church there in the Philippines?
Well, obviously the politics of the country, you know, there are different battles and so on. The Pope himself said that he was very much in favor of Pope Paul VI's encyclical document called Humanae Vitae, which said that artificial contraception is not an allowed option for Catholics. And he said that people should be helped to live this doctrine with compassion, but that he was in favor of it. Now, he came to the Philippines and said that because people might have got confused. But obviously the politics and the fighting goes on from all sides, and I think Catholics need to think about this and make their own contribution to the political life of the country, and not just the bishops, but ordinary Catholics to say, well, I agree with this, and I in my family I do this or I do that, and that makes sense to me. Otherwise, it looks as if it's only a doctrine that comes down from above, whereas what the Pope is saying, this is a doctrine that can be lived on the ground level by ordinary people who can tell you how they live it and how it's helpful and makes them happy in their lives.
Well said, and he is reinforcing his opposition to same-sex marriage at the same time that the U.S. Supreme Court has just announced that it will take on that issue. So it's interesting times for the world, certainly. Let's go back. Go ahead, Jack, and then I'll go back to Anna.
No. I was going to say that he's not in favor of the redefinition of marriage because he believes in the fact that a marriage between a man and a woman is the best place for children and for the family. But he is very much in love with everybody, whatever their position in life, their sexual orientation. And it's been noticed, his famous comment, "Who am I to judge if a man is gay and follows God?"
He has had some inclusive remarks that have been well noted.
He's very much in love with everybody, but he still thinks, like the Catholic Church, that the best place for children is the family based on marriage between a man and a woman, and that should not be lost. The getting rid of discrimination must not be done at the price of losing marriage.
Let's go back to Anna Korn, who's there. Anna, you've been doing some very good reporting there on everyday life there in the Philippines. You've talked with a couple, one of them renowned there in the country, a same-sex couple that married in the United States. You've also been reporting on the poverty. You said the other day you got a little pushback from people calling it a poor nation because they have made steps forward, but many still exist in poverty there. She's been following the Pope's 5-day trip, and Jack Valero, co-founder of Catholic Voices, is in London. Anna, we've been hearing the Pope's message, hearing the singing, the voices coming together. Will this be the last few moments that the people of the Philippines will see this Pope?
Well, he will give Mass here. He will then head home to the Archbishop's residence where he will spend the night. Tomorrow he heads off back to Rome. He's expected to leave here around 10 o'clock in the morning. Thousands will still line the streets just to catch a glimpse of the Pope, as they have done for the last 4 days. I mean, he really has received a rock star reception ever since he arrived in country. Authorities had expected some 6 million to gather here, setting a papal milestone. Obviously, the last time, 20 years ago, when Pope John Paul II was here in 1995 for World Youth Day, and he delivered Mass in this park. 5 million gathered. Now, because of the rain, I don't think we're going to reach the numbers that authorities had predicted, but there are easily 2 or 3 million people, and we got out into the crowds a little bit earlier, and they're standing in the rain, and they have been standing in the rain ever since last night, camping out, waiting for the gates to open. They are there in the mud, soaked. Yes, they're wearing ponchos. Many of them weren't allowed to take umbrellas in. But they said their faith is waterproof, that they don't care if they're wet and cold. They just want to see the Pope.
Well, it must be as meaningful to him to look out and see the crowd and to see everyone soaking wet, just standing there reveling in this moment. Jack, what do you think about the reception that he's been getting, and what does it leave for people, for the typical Catholic person, to have experienced something like witnessing a visiting Pope to their country, and one like the Philippines that has been through so much with these storms and the loss in Tacloban?
Sure, it's truly massive. I mean, the Philippines is very far from Rome and very far from Europe, where so they may feel that they are remote, and to have the Pope, the most important person in the Catholic Church, to go to see them, and a Pope who's very close to the people. You could see he actually added things to the schedule, like having a meeting with the street children, with the poor. He's just a very close person, close to the people, and they love him. So they feel very privileged to be with him. Many Filipinos have, there's great poverty, so they're not going to travel to Europe to see Rome, to see the Pope. To have him at home is a great gift for them. And you can tell that, you know, by the lining of the streets, by the rapturous reception he's had. And so it's truly massive for them.
Yes, I could certainly understand that. And he has gone off script, hasn't he? And he did that when he went to Tacloban. He put aside his prepared homily and delivered a personal message. And he said to the people, the survivors of Haiyan, he said he respected the feelings of those who felt they'd been let down by God, but implored them to move forward in their faith. And as you mentioned earlier, this was a huge reason for his visit to the Philippines, the horrible loss that Tacloban saw 2013.
Yes, 6,000 people died and more than 1 million were lost their homes. And I think 16 million was the figure of people who were somehow affected by it. And the Pope is not somebody who preaches from above. He wants to be where people are suffering. You know, if you could classify this Pope as a man who is standing by the people who are suffering. And the interesting thing is he goes there and doesn't say, let me tell you why you're suffering. No, he says, look, I don't understand it either, but I want to stand with you. And that's truly powerful.
Right. He said just a few moments ago, we forget to remain at heart that we are the children of God. I want to talk with you too, Jack. Just before arriving in the Philippines, he made some comments in reference to the horror that we've seen in Europe the past week with the terrorism that kind of took some people back, almost sounding like, you know, that, well, he did state that there should be limits to freedom of expression. What's your reaction to what he had to say and what he was meaning to say?
I think the main thing is that exactly that freedom of expression is not unlimited, that there are limits to it, and that's something that we all agree, because, for example, we wouldn't mock the people who were killed in Paris by the terrorists. We would feel that would be beyond the pale, you know. So there are limits which are mostly self-imposed, and I think the Pope was talking about self-imposed limits. He wasn't talking about law or about things being punished, people being punished for things, but about how we should behave. And the way to understand this is how he spoke about the common good. You know, we're building the common good, and we need to think very carefully what it is that, how we speak in order to build this common good. He went to Sri Lanka before going to the Philippines, a country ravaged by war for 30 years. And he said to them, look, we can live together, people of all races, people of all religions can live together in peace. And this was his message for Sri Lanka. He spent 3 days there basically giving this message. And now and in the plane, he was given the same sort of message, saying, you know, we need to live together. We are free to express ourselves, of course. This is very important. He called the murders an aberration. There should never be any violence with religion, ever, never. No ifs, no buts. But,
yes,
but freedom of expression is limited by our own feeling that we must live together in peace.
He also traveled to Turkey last year to support religious tolerance. So certainly this Pope stays very connected to the issues and events of this world and speaks out about them quite candidly.
Yes. This is very important to him. And another thing that came through in that comment is that some people thought, well, you can mock politicians because they have the power, and you can mock religion. And what he said by using the image of his mother, he was saying, look, mocking religion is like mocking people's family, people's most cherished beliefs. We shouldn't do this. We shouldn't play with people's most cherished beliefs. In a sense, for a magazine to criticize people's religion is like for the elite to criticize the voiceless people and their religion, you know, so the powerless. And he felt this was wrong, you know. He's not talking about the law. He's not talking about what should be legal or illegal. He's talking about how we should behave. And in that sense, it's very good that he reminds us that there are limits to freedom of expression based on the fact that we must live in peace and harmony, and we must respect each other. And this is a man of respect. In the same way as we he preaches respect for homosexuals. He preaches respect for all religions, and we should behave in that way.
Well, Jack, thank you. As this Mass continues, it's been going on for almost an hour now. Pope's trip for us there in Manila, where the Mass is taking place, and Jack Valero, co-founder of Catholic Voices for us in London. Let's start with you, Jack. So let's pick up on what he had to say about the family and his reference to protect the family from insidious attacks. What might he meant by that?
I think that he was warning against ideological attacks on the family, that, you know, this whole debate about same-sex marriage, that to redefine marriage away from the understanding that we've had for millennia about marriage being between a man and a woman for the sake of the family and children. And also, of course, divorce, which we've had for a long time, broken families and so on. All these difficulties of the family. The family has a very important mission in the church and in society. You know, how if the family is strong, society will be strong. And the Pope is saying the family is very important. He's dedicated a whole year of study to the family in the Catholic Church, with a meeting of bishops that just happened last October and a new one next October. And he's just warning against ideological things that are acting against the family. As I say again, you know, to say equality means that we must redefine marriage. Well, he says, no, we mustn't discriminate against anybody, but the family and marriage are not to be redefined for the sake of that, you know. So I think that's one thing, and also the idea that I have to pursue my own happiness exclusively. He's moving away from that. He's saying, no, we must care for each other, and so the family is the place where we care for each other, and that's why it's important, you know. That's where we become real human beings.
Right. He said we forget to remain at heart that we are children of God. He also spoke about the need of children there in the Philippines and the ones that sadly wind up on the streets and, you know, apart from their family. Let's go to Ana Corin. She's there in Manila because you've been reporting on the poverty issues there in the Philippines and the fact that so many families are ripped apart due to poverty issues, Ana.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Poverty does rip apart families. And I tell you what else rips apart families is the fact that there are so many overseas migrant workers from the Philippines, 10% of the population, who are forced to leave their families, break up their families to provide a better life for their families. So this is a business here in the Philippines. Because these people cannot make enough money living in their own country, they move overseas and take up jobs to send back remittances to their families. So I think this is another thing that perhaps Pope Francis was touching on, and that is where you need to see the government and better governance produce a much better, robust society so that the fruits of the economy really do trickle down. But yes, as far as poverty goes in this country, 20% of the population lives below the poverty line. You're talking about, you know, families existing on $2 a day, and you know, there are families, poor families with 5, 6, 7 children living in the slums. Now this cycle just continues. So this is one of the battles that has been playing out here in the Philippines, certainly amongst the people, the Catholic people of this country and the church. And that is where that reproductive health law, which came into effect in 2012, was so important. The President, Benigno Aquino, he fought the Catholic Church on it. He stood his ground despite the vigorous opposition from the church. It still exists this day, but he felt it was very important for the people, the poor women of this country, to have access to family planning, to have access to contraception. Yes, we did hear from Pope Francis throughout, you know, his stay here of the family and preserving the family unit, preserving life. And he talked about it, you know, from the unborn child to those infirmed. So his is a message from the Catholic Church, but here on the ground, Natalie, it is a very different situation, as that social divide does exist between the people and the Church. But certainly Pope Francis, he does unite the country, he does unite all Catholics and brings them all together.
Yes, and Jack, we were talking earlier that although this is a predominantly Catholic country, the Philippines is home to 60% of Asia's 130 million Catholics. At the same time, attendance at church services is off somewhat. More people living a secular life, and certainly this Pope has been reaching out to try to reinvigorate the Catholics to re-engage with their connection to the church.
Yes, and he's very much with them. You know, he doesn't say, I'm going to give you the answer. He stands by them. I think we were just hearing about poverty a minute ago, and it's interesting, he said on arrival, the poor are at the center of the gospel. If you take the poor away, then the gospel ceases to exist. And that was really powerful. I'm standing with you, I'm your brother. And I think, you know, like everywhere in the world, you know, people sometimes reject religion, or they go and they don't practice it. But here's a man who says, you know, this is really relevant to you, because what the church preaches is for you to be a better person, to build a better family, to help other families, to help each other, to build a world of peace and so on. So I think people connect with that and see that religion is relevant for them. So he very much is close to them, and he's seen to be close to them.
And as far as his humanitarian side, you were saying earlier, in case viewers are just joining us this hour, but last hour you were talking about how important it was for Pope Francis to travel to Tacloban, which was ravaged by Typhoon Haiyan in 2013. Millions continue to be homeless. And even though his advisors were saying, you don't need to go to Tacloban because of the tropical storm bearing down, this Pope went right ahead anyway.
That's right. I mean, in fact, this was the main reason for the trip, is to go to this very, very remote part, which is afflicted by these weather problems, and to be with the people and to say, and in fact, he had a speech saying various things in English, and he put that aside and spoke to them in Spanish from the heart, saying, I'm with you. And they told me not to come because there was another typhoon coming. But I said, no, I must come. I must be with you. This is the whole point of coming to the Philippines, to be with you, with the people in need. You know, there are millions of people who have been affected. And he's like the father of the family, being with his children. And that's what he feels. And people in Tacloban, you know, they never see anybody famous. And they were absolutely, you know, delighted to have the Pope with them as their father. That's why they turned out in such large numbers, even though it was raining and very bad weather throughout.
Oh, yes, they were standing in mud puddles as he spoke. Can't imagine what these people that live on the far fringes of society and in this island nation, what it meant to them to have him come there. And back to Ana Corona as they begin to wrap up this Mass. Also, Ana, he left Tacloban 4 hours early, and John Allen, the senior Vatican analyst, pointed out that doesn't mean he's going to get back to Manila and just relax for 4 hours. He'll find other things to do to reach out to people and pack into more schedule. And we have seen him on the move throughout these 5 days.
Yeah, absolutely. He makes those